And our speakers today come from there. And they are Adam Bent, who is the strategic advisor and interim director, Fisheries and Seafood, and Ocean Wise's Sustainable Fisheries and Seafood Science Lead, who is Samantha, all right, Renshaw. So we have two of them, and I have big paragraphs here. I'll just read quickly because you've seen this, it's been shared. Adam is an impact entrepreneur working at the intersections of ocean, climate, and food systems, right? He has it all. Yeah, ocean, climate, and how do we sustain our ocean in the face of climate change while feeding the billions, right? I think it's a very serious question. It connects to one of our projects here, the food, climate change, and biodiversity loss project. So, and one thing I want to say here is that he is the co-founder and former CEO of Scout. That is the seafood brand that actually made tin fish culturally cool with consumers in North America, right? Very culturally cool. Europeans love tin food. I know Africans too, but in North America, it's a little bit, one wiser. Right? So you made it cool, which is nice. Take them down the food world. So that's that. Now let me say a few words about Samantha. Samantha has been working at Oceanwide since 2021, and her sustainable fisheries and seafood team seeks to engage with small-scale fisheries across Canada. Small-scale fisheries are important in this house. We'll try to compare them with industrial and what they do to each other and how to make things sustainable. So again, right at home, Samantha, yeah. And one of your goals is your team. You seek to engage with these small-scale fishers and in Canada with the goal of better support. You want to support their livelihoods, right? People depend on this. So I think I'll stop here. And you also incorporate indigenous knowledge. These days I talk a lot about that. Many of us do. I tell economists, you have to modify your economics. This quarterly profit is killing the world. So bring indigenous wisdom. So that is beautiful. I will now step out. Welcome. Take over. Make us happy in the next 1 hour.
Thanks, Rashid, for the intro. Okay, let's get into it. Nice to see you all today. If I figure out how to work the next slide here, what's going on? All right. I think most of you might know about Oceanwise, but it's been around since 1956, so formerly part of the Vancouver Aquarium. But unfortunately, because of COVID, the org had to sell the aquarium as an asset, just because of the operational cost being so high. So there was lots of different conservation programs happening within the aquarium. And as a result of that sale, kind of took everything and then formed one NGO, took the name from the seafood program, which had a lot of recognition in the Canadian market, and now the organization is known as Oceanwise. But thematically, we're working across ocean pollution. So a lot of work in plastics and pollution, overfishing, which is obviously what our program tackles. We also have a strong whales program, an education program, and a seaforestation program. Oceanwise is also transforming from being more research and academic based to becoming a lot more action oriented and going directly to the problem. So we're really looking at market-based solutions and ways to incorporate technology across the organization into all of our programs, so that we can be leading on the innovation front and continue to be competitive in a changing landscape, which is the kind of theme that we're going to be speaking about today. I already got an introduction, so I'll skip over some of that. I'm an entrepreneur. I've worked across technology and food systems at the intersection of oceans and climate, worked with a lot of brands, a lot of retailers. So I definitely bring that market lens. I'm also serving as a voice for Oceans Food System at the Aspen Institute. And then, Sam.
Sure. Yeah, hi. And Rashid, thanks for the intro. So I also don't have to say much, but might be fun to know a little bit more about me. I did my master's in marine management, and my area of focus back then, a few years ago, was shark conservation. And that really led me to a path of looking at overfishing as kind of the issue here and learning more about the reasons that conservation can be impactful, where we're managing people, not managing the fish necessarily. And that led me to kind of my world of small scale fisheries. Fisheries. And I also wanted to give a shout out to some of the folks on my team that I couldn't do the work without. So not with us today is my colleague Scott, who's our science specialist, and a new analyst that's going to be starting with us in a few short weeks, as well as my colleague Alyssa, who actually is the one who does all of our engagement with Indigenous folks and our stakeholders for relationship building. So just want to give them a shout out even though they're not here.
Sweet.
And I'll be back.
Okay, so we're going to talk about climate change and how this landscape is changing. And just want you to kind of take pause and think about what if the next great climate solution isn't policy driven, but it's a product. Ocean and climate tech is not really a fringe sector anymore. It's becoming a lot more mainstream. The general public are a lot more aware of ocean issues. So it's becoming more centralized and pop culture. More people are paying attention. So conservation, given that there's carbon markets and a price on climate change now, is becoming more and more productized. And there's a lot of private sector activity happening in the space where traditionally conservation organizations and NGOs had more domain expertise and leadership. We've had 29 COPs since 1995. It's very difficult to think about the progress that's been made in that time. Between now and then, we're still lacking progress. So we have a growing series of COPs that take place with a lot of registrants going year over year to kind of navel gaze and just talk about the same issues. And governments are failing at scaling some of these solutions and incorporating them. So things are changing. It's going more into the hands of private organizations, startups, corporations, businesses. Of course, government still has a very important role to play. But the format that's existed around COPs and trying to solve for climate change have not been successful. Incrementally successful maybe, but not massively impactful if you consider the time and the amount of activity that's happened behind them. So enter the blue economy in the way that it's being think of now. The ocean economy is valued at approximately 24 trillion. So that includes everything from maritime transport, logistics, energy, tourism, food. It's a huge sector, and it's totally undervalued when we think about environmental philanthropy and the amount of support that oceans as a sector gets. And fortunately, the private sector is starting to pay a bit more attention to the opportunities that exist in the ocean sector and is catching up to where philanthropy has traditionally spent their time and their funds. So nature positive investments in ocean startups are on the rise. A lot of that is around habitat management, ecosystem services, restoration. We'll get into some stats in a little bit here, but the private sector funding has grown from 9.4 billion to about 100 billion in the last couple of years alone. So if we think about the time scale that I'll talk about in a few slides about where philanthropy has been in the last 20 years, and then how much venture capital and private sector's funding has showed up just in the last 4, it's outpaced. It's super fast. And technology is really driving this investment in the sector. The issue, though, is that commercial readiness and pilot programs still remain a huge challenge for innovations to actually become scalable and sustainably profitable over time. So we're also seeing a blurring of the line, between a climate tech org or company and a conservation org. They're merging a lot more. So new companies that start today generally have a purpose, they have a mission, they're rooted in impact, and they're trying to address climate issues. And they're showing up with ESG deliverables and impact deliverables, but also the opportunity to generate profit, and that's new. NGOs, startups, venture capitals, and accelerators are increasingly building solutions in this space. And impact is not just measured in publication or protected areas now. It's being tracked with data, and it's being monetized. So climate urgency and biodiversity targets are driving a lot of this private sector activity, huge advancements in just the cost of technology. The cost of technology is coming down. It's cheaper and faster to build things now. Engineering talent, product development talent, design talent, all those costs are coming down. So it's getting easier to build solutions and to scale them faster. There's big investor appetite and funding diversification that's happening. And then overall, just general consumer demand and awareness that I mentioned earlier is just driving kind of that market force with, environmental and social governance and corporate social responsibility being the 2 other big factors. And then you have compliance and new legislation that's starting to accelerate a lot of these solutions. So I'll talk about a couple of new models, and I promise we'll get into examples. But tech nonprofits is something that's only really a couple of years old. So we have startups or technology companies that are now launching as nonprofits, but they behave like private sector tech companies. And that's a really interesting kind of theme to pay attention to, where yes, they're looking to still generate sustainable revenues to maintain operations, but they're building for impact outcomes and not for profitability and investor returns. You have climate venture studios, which is a new and evolving model that's, I would say, even just 3 years old. You come with your idea, working with sophisticated networks of investors, usually with research capabilities, really setting up for success to de-risk your idea, your innovation, your concept, taking that research through pilot into commercialization and scale up with funding attached to it. That de-risks going out on your own as a startup and doing it from scratch without a support network. We also see that NGOs are now behaving more like investors and venture capitalists, where they're creating funds of their own and they're identifying climate and ocean sector startups and investing in them like private funds. So we have Schmidt Marine Technology Partners, World Wildlife Fund Ventures, the Nature Conservancy has a fund. So this is new in some cases it's a couple of years old, but we're seeing more and more organizations, including OceanWise, who are actually looking at potentially investing in ocean sector startups and innovations as a new way of doing things. And that's cool because NGOs have a lot to offer. As we think about the private sector activity coming into this space, we also need to defend the credible work, the history that NGOs have leading in this space. Before their lunch is eaten by climate tech companies entering who look like them and behave like them and can offer up both those ESG deliverables and also profitable returns to investors. And if we think about the capital stack, it's the same wealthy families and same wealthy corporations that fund through their family offices, through their own foundations, which is philanthropy, and then also through their own venture funds. So those same high net worth individuals or families are deploying capital in these different vehicles. And it's trickling out to ocean innovation startups and NGOs in a new way. And like I said, those lines are getting increasingly blurred. So if we look at this Venn diagram here, you have nature tech and MRV in the top left corner, ecosystem restoration companies, ocean-enabled industrial transition. So you have companies in there like Sway that's making biomaterials and new films from kelp. You have Atlantic Sea Farms in there, who's working to transition Maine lobster fishers to be able to farm kelp in the off season as a way to protect their livelihoods and have additional income sources. And there's some technology integration happening there. On the top right corner in ecosystem restorations, you see a company called Urchinomics. So they're deploying fleets of divers to remove urchins to restore kelp forests, and they're monetizing that and developing new markets for urchins globally. We have Goldfish on the bottom right corner, health and habitat management. They're aggregating over 50 different data sets available globally, addressing labor flags, vessel registries and issues in seafood supply chains, so that market operators can become a lot more intelligent about eradicating bad actor supply from their supply chains. So these are all for-profit private sector companies, and most of them have come online just in the last couple of years alone. Since 2017, I think we've seen $2 billion in private sector investment enter the ocean sector space for these innovators. And then comparatively, if we go back to 2010, for philanthropy funding the space, you had about half $1 billion in investment, about 400 to 500 million. And it's taken up to 2022 to reach $1 billion in annual funding. So you think about the capital stack and where philanthropy has gone from 2010 to 2023, and then how quickly venture capital and private sector funding shown up just in a 5-year span, it has already almost outpaced philanthropy flowing into the space. So it's a thriving ecosystem. It's exciting. It means that for you folks in the room here who are working across a variety of ocean issues, whether it's research-based or maybe you have an idea for a company, it's a good time to be working in oceans. There's 180 accelerators and innovation hubs around the world that are supporting ocean innovators. This is an incredible number. So, these can be in the forms of accelerators. So you enter with a cohort of other companies, you're supported by different mentors, institutions, and investors. They help you ideate, work through problems, and get you more commercially ready. Then you have things like the Renshaw Prize, which is competition-based. So you can come in with your innovation, participate, benefit from all the PR, exposure to commercial entities for your solution, potentially gain investment from that. And you also have incubators and the venture studio model that I referred to earlier. There's 150 funds investing at the intersection of ocean. You can check out a website called Liquid Grid, where all this is tracked. So you can see the amount of activity regionally taking place and the investment going into the ecosystem. So the private sector identifies, ocean sector startups as nature positive initiatives with integrated actions that support biodiversity, climate, and communities for a thriving future on Earth. Sounds a lot like how NGOs position themselves, except these are for-profit companies. And then the philanthropic investment I mentioned earlier has jumped from that 430 million in 2010 to 1 billion in 2022. But commercial readiness and market demand need to accelerate. So we'll get into a couple of examples. We have a few that we're working on at OceanWise as we, as an NGO, continue to transform and become more market-based and technology-driven. We worked with some major brands, including Patagonia, Arc'teryx, and Aritzia, 13 companies altogether, including some manufacturers of dryers, to figure out how we could eradicate microfiber pollution from garments. So this is a multi-stakeholder, private industry, NGO, and private sector collaboration. As a result of our research and the collaboration with these major brands, we're able to take that and start to integrate that into their manufacturing practices and their supply chain. And then we can celebrate that win because we can actually use data and point to impact. On the seafood side, you might be familiar with our eco label. I don't know if you guys recognize that. It's been around in Canada for about 15 years. But when we think about what market operators do, and I call market operators very loosely retailers, distributors, and big consumer brands. Let's use Sobeys as an example. Sobeys probably sells about $60–70 million worth of seafood annually, about 430 individual sources. They are trying to look at traceability issues as one problem to solve in their supply chain. They're also looking at labor and livelihood issues in their supply chain as another siloed issue. They're also looking at emissions and climate impacts in their supply chain as another siloed issue. They want business intelligence. They want to know if they should be switching to other suppliers. Can they get competitive pricing for the same species in another region? That might be an improved score on the labor side or the emission side. And then, of course, their regular certification management and all the compliance that's required. It's exhausting for market partners to have to go through all of these steps just to purchase responsibly. And right now, these six called siloed issues are being worked on across or supported by multiple NGOs, consultants, various different tech platforms. And because it's so bifurcated and it slows down their commitments towards responsible seafood procurement, we've recognized the need to evolve from our eco label into actually creating a supply chain management platform that consolidates all 6 of these issues into one supply chain management platform that they can use to manage their entire inventory, all their procurement, and all the data that they want to pull out of their supply chain. So we spent 17 years growing responsible seafood in Canada and into the US, really based on the eco label. And if you think about organizations like the Marine Stewardship Council, Fishwise, Seafood Watch in the States, OceanWise, we all have eco labels. We all try to help the market communicate their responsible seafood commitments to consumers. But it's very binary. It's like, this is a bad source, this is a good source. There's so many externalities that are not included in eco labels. They are an important piece of the puzzle, but they are not a solve. And we do not want to give the market just a way out where, this is OceanWise recommended, or this is MSC certified, our work here is done. That's not the case. It's a continuous improvement process. There's so much work to be done. And in some ways, eco labels have actually become part of the problem. So they're still an important part of the solution, but they've also slowed progress in some ways. So the platform strategy is ambitious, it's complicated, and it would be easier not to do it, but we're embarking on that with other NGOs. And that's really about becoming more operationally integrated into market partner supply chains. If they just have to show up to us as certification or recommendation bodies once a year for an audit, and we tell them that they're doing poorly or well, or X percentage of your total supply is recommended or certified, that's helpful. But we're not actually involved in the day-to-day, and we kind of lose out on opportunity to connect what they're doing to impact on the water. So that's the genesis of the supply chain management platform that we're building as one example. I'll pass it over to Sam here to talk more about our small-scale fisheries work.
Thanks, Adam. I'm actually gonna back up just one slide and let you know kind of what my job is, in essence, is as the science manager to make the recommendations and decide what is OceanWise, what gets that label and what doesn't. You can think of that as just a really big literature review of everything that we know about fisheries, about the seafood product, and then we decide whether or not, according to our standard, which is also the same standard that the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch program uses, whether something is OceanWise. And we've kind of come to the realization that if I'm doing a literature review, what about the knowledge that doesn't exist in peer review form, or fisheries who don't have up-to-date stock assessments? My hands are really tied when it comes to doing my literature review on my laptop in my home office or at work, to recognize something like small-scale fisheries that are doing everything they can to meet the requirements of either a certification like the Marine Stewardship Council, but maybe they've been priced out of something like a third-party certification. These types of data that we're looking at are usually very expensive. They usually require small-scale fisheries in particular to jump through a lot of hoops to reach some of these standards. So we've decided, okay, well, what does it look like for someone like us, a nonprofit, to support those that want to be involved in the sustainable seafood market, have some sort of recognition, but otherwise just have not had the opportunity to be equitably involved? And in comes our small scale fisheries side of our program. And what I'm really passionate about is helping these small scale fisheries or other fisheries in general that are doing everything they can, and how can we reward conservation efforts through some of these market levers that we're starting to pull and create some incentive for not just sustainable practice, but improvements in some cases. So I'm going to give two examples of how we're working on this. The first is through our pilot project with small scale First Nations fisheries, and how to localize sustainable development goals. And then the second is about kind of the uptake of technology through ropeless gear incentives in the market for lobster and snow crab on the East Coast. So this is not obviously a very scientifically sound graph, but this is a good distribution of what our recommendations look like. The ocean-wise symbol is the ones that we would put a logo on, and these yellow fish are ones that we wouldn't recommend, or we don't recommend for one reason or another. The blank space is where we have gaps. So obviously you can see that there is this large section at the bottom where we know a little bit about some of these small scale fisheries, but really the limitation here is data. And data in this case is what I'm looking at: peer reviewed literature, all of those things that are required in our standard. Purely environmental at this stage, that's what we look at through 4 criteria. The abundance of the stock, what is bycatch in the fishery, how's the management, and are there any impacts on ecosystem? For salmon fisheries as well, we look at the influence of hatchery on the hatchery stocks on the wild populations, but this is leaving out a lot. So the first thing that we're trying to address is closing the gap where only 8% of small scale fisheries have been involved in any sort of assessment process, either by something like OceanWise, a certification system, or in some cases, just a typical stock assessment. So we're trying to close this gap. And that's the first way of looking at other forms of knowledge that can help us understand what sustainability means for small scale artisanal fisheries. In this case, Indigenous knowledge is a really potential powerful way that we can start to incorporate some more of these like long-standing stewardship efforts of communities. And the second way is this gap up at the very top. So how do we move then some of these yellow, unsustainable, or whatever you want to label them as fisheries towards the higher end of sustainability, but through some of these innovations in technology, and how can we use the market to kind of drive that forward? And this is Adam called it the Willy Wonka factory a graphic of our small scale fisheries work, so bear with me on this one. It's a work in progress, but basically this is how our theory works for now, is that once a product has the OceanWise eco label, the idea is that consumers can identify it, put their dollars where the eco label is, and help to kind of drive up the support through our purchasing power for the fisheries. Our hope is that we can do this with small scale fisheries, but this is typically our theory of change currently. But what happens when we don't have those recommendations? Well, there's 2 ways we can approach this. Like I said, we can either improve our ability to use data, or we can improve the market practices. And so those will be kind of the 2 streams of these examples moving forward. I'll start with how we're improving data and availability of knowledge through our current project. The title of this one's a big one: Advancing Sustainable Development in Fishery-Reliant Coastal Communities. It's a mouthful. We're calling it our SDG project because it is grounded in the Sustainable Development Goals. But this was really born out of the idea that fisheries were approaching us, wondering how they could be ocean-wise, but because they had these gaps in data, we couldn't really recommend them. And so rather than turning them away or saying, sorry, we can't allow you to participate in something like our program, we decided that we were going to actually pilot what it would look like to co-create a different type of assessment for small-scale First Nations fisheries. That way we can develop something that acknowledges and incorporates, sorry, I'm just gonna click out of these. And what it can look like to actually incorporate Indigenous knowledge and sustainability from the jump, not just relying on our standards, but what other things do we need to look at to represent and equitably offer sustainability market to these fisheries. So we're working with 3 across the country. The Natnawaganeg First Nation is in New Brunswick in the Miramichi River. They're a traditional striped bass fishery. They use weirs, super sustainable. But right now the lack there is that there's not enough stock assessment that's been completed. The Gitniao First Nation and the Mushlet are in BC. The Gitniao is just a little bit north of Prince Rupert, and they are a salmon fishery, as well as the Mushlet First Nation on the west coast of Vancouver Island, both as well impacted by hatchery populations. And so understanding what the sustainability looks like for them, having fished and stewarded these resources for generations. And the goal here is to look at primarily these 3 sustainable development goals, so conservation of threatened species, and then these other 2 where we're really taking a bit of a turn on the typical definition of our ocean-wise assessment. So what does it look like for sustainable growth in the fishery from an economics perspective? How do we ensure that something like an eco-label, if there is any benefit from an increased price premium, where does it live? Does it live with the grocery stores, the retailers? How do we actually ensure that our program is supporting dollars and cents being returned to the community themselves, to the fishers? And then kind of at the end of our project is looking at how can we support the fisheries in the market? So reducing those inequities, inequalities that we've seen previously, where a lot of the First Nations fisheries that we've heard of are not involved in any sort of market program like ours. And that last piece will be developing gotta click back in here, fit for purpose market. And I wanted to highlight a couple companies that we're working with that are already doing this really well, and that we'll hope to deepen our relationships with as we move forward. Skipper Auto and Authentic Indigenous Seafoods, they're both local to BC. Skipper Auto is a co-op of fisher families where you could basically order a subscription service and they deliver fish to you. But the idea is that all of this is pre-planned for the year, so fishing families know how much they need to catch, the price that they're going to be getting from Skipper Auto as a company, and then it's a bit more of a reassurance for them to have a living wage throughout the year. Currently working with 45 fishing families. I think this week actually it's increased, and they're really wonderful. They're female owned and operated. And Authentic Indigenous Seafoods is quite similar. They're a co-op of sustainable Indigenous fishers, both medium and small scale, and they are all guided by their traditional practices, giving them a space to kind of market, sell their product. And they've also developed their own in-house traceability system with QR codes on packaging that can help consumers connect more directly with the fishers themselves. And this was an extremely high-level overview of our work on small-scale fisheries, so I can give it back to Adam in a minute. But really what we're trying to do is just allow some of these fisheries a place in the market and understand what that looks like as we move forward, unlocking these really local, traceable, low carbon emission supply chains that maybe just a lot of people don't know about, and understand the value of our eco-label for fisheries that fall in this small scale category. I'm giving a talk about this on Monday, like just after the weekend, if anyone else is interested to learn more about the specifics of this project. It's on our website, ocean.org, under our events page if you're interested, or just come ask me afterwards. But a couple more things before I turn it back to Adam is now, okay, if we're looking at the data side, incorporating other ways of knowing, wonderful. What about this area that we know fisheries are unsustainable, but we want to move them into a more sustainable practice? The way that we're doing this is through a pilot project, or we're hopefully doing this through our pilot project with ropeless gear. I've been living in Halifax for the last 7 years. I've recently relocated to BC, but this is a huge issue on the East Coast. If anyone is unfamiliar, that lobster and snow crab have the tendency to entangle whale North Atlantic right whales, the second leading cause of mortality behind ship strikes for this population, and they are not doing well. If you haven't heard, they are critically endangered, about 360 total and only about 70 breeding females. So this is a really urgent issue. And right now, lobster and snow crab, we do not recommend, as do a few other programs, because of this potential risk of entanglement. And so this is a big problem. There are a lot of fisheries, though, that are trying to do things the right way. A lot of gear innovations have helped to drive this ropeless on-demand system innovation space, I guess, if you want to call it. So how this gear works is by removing the vertical line out of the water, putting it into the ropeless or the trap itself, and then an acoustic signal is sent down to say, okay, time to release. It floats to the surface. The fisherman can reel it in. This is sort of the silver bullet it's seen as in a lot of cases. It's not the only management option for the fishery, but it is one of the ways that we're hoping we can drive improvements in this fishery by rewarding fishers that are already adopting this gear. The problem is right now that it is still quite expensive. The tech is still improving. It hasn't quite caught up to commercial function yet. But how can we use our business partners to help incentivize these adaptations and actually inject some money into potentially the fishers' pockets that are trying to do the right thing by using this gear? It takes a lot of time out of their day to learn how to use this, to engage with scientists that are doing all these trials. But if we can reward them for this catch through something like our eco label, then hopefully that can be one way to sustain this type of industry and innovation in the market. By marketing whale-safe options and helping create solutions. So these are the two ways that we're hoping that our fisheries program can support those that are trying to do the right thing. So I'll give it back to Adam.
Good stuff. Yeah, so I think the intersection between what we're trying to solve for on the commercial side and then what we're doing boots on the ground kind of field work with some of our First Nations communities that we're supporting, and eventually they're going to continue to intersect. But speaking of whales, this is a good segue into one of the other solutions that we're working on. I mean, nobody wants to buy lobster that potentially caused harm to a whale. So as an example, Disney, they have 99% green rated seafood supply across their whole operation, except for lobster. So as an NGO, we can actually, through that relationship, try to get them to fund our ropeless lobster gear project, potentially with some of our First Nations partners, and then develop that market access opportunity. While still leveraging some of the new gear types and innovations that are happening there to avoid the entanglement issue. And whales, everybody loves whales, very charismatic creatures, and they get hit by ships a lot. So there's over 20,000 known and documented ship strikes annually. Obviously, whales provide amazing ecosystem services across the board, both in food, in the ocean in general. So OceanWise has moved over the years from a kind of aggregation of data of citizens' whale sightings networks and a couple of other private data sets around whale sightings, have aggregated that into an application that mariners can then use, and we notify them if there's been a whale spotted, and then they can change their course and avoid the collision. So since we launched the RAS program, we've been able to attribute the program to avoiding about 200,000 whale vessel encounters. When we think about kind of the deeper tech part of this, so moving and graduating from just the app, we're now working with a tech partner called Whale Spotter, and they've created pretty advanced detection systems using infrared cameras that are trained on 10 years of research at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution with whale imagery, migration patterns, and other data sets that give the detection systems 100% accuracy. So OceanWise is now busy at work implementing these systems with different ports, cruise lines, shipping companies. This is a operational need for a lot of these commercial partners. They don't want to hit whales. It sucks. It doesn't look good for their operation, and they get to claim some ESG benefits from it. So as a conservation organization, moving again from just research and practical knowledge that hitting whales is bad, but actually offering a real solution integrated into their operations that is measurable with data. So the systems are really cool. We are going live in Dubai and here in the Vancouver port. We are working with BC Ferries, Washington State Ferries, and this has a kind of 5-year global expansion plan, and hopefully we'll be able to create the most sophisticated network in the world to avoid hitting whales. So basically we bring in data from citizens reports, those infrared cameras, hydrophones, and then partner data providers. We aggregate that into one system, and then we push that out through our desktop app, through text messages, through the navigation system, and then operation centers. So this program has been wildly successful. We're able to kind of compete with private sector operators that are in the space as well. I have no idea how to shut off the Teams. Moving on to some other cool examples that are not oceanwide specific. I think this one's really cool. ZEMBA, the Zero Emissions Maritime Buyers Alliance. This is backed by the Aspen Institute, and they're working with a variety of brands, large companies, IKEA, Patagonia, Amazon. And to accelerate decarbonization of maritime transport, they are working with the shipping companies who own the vessels, and then they're incubating innovative fuels that are way more responsible and low emitting. And then they're creating a buyer network and tendering big bids so that these massive companies pool their resources together and will spend more on funding these responsible shipping lines with these new fuel innovations. So it de-risks it for the maritime operators. It commercializes and supports the innovators who are driving the innovations around these new fuels. And then they get to benefit from carbon drawdown. It benefits their offset agreements. And it's a win-win-win for everybody. So it's a nonprofit driving these changes in the market, supporting the startups that can solve the problem, and then working with corporations who are also part of the issue and can participate in a better outcome. So far, another really cool kind of data company out of the Bay Area. They're an ocean tech company, and they're combining hardware and data to monitor ocean conditions. So they have a global fleet of drifting buoys. They can drop them in right before a hurricane to get really sophisticated data to send back to NOAA or defense. They can use that data and support NGOs' research work. There's all kinds of different applications, but it's using AI and predictive models to optimize shipping routes. It's looking at emissions reduction. So there's a lot of applications, and it's really about the kind of IoT of the ocean. So bringing down the costs of data so that any type of organization, whether it be government, private sector, NGO, defense, can utilize that affordably and have a much richer, more robust data environment for all of us to be able to pull what we need from it to make good decisions. Mandolin, I think, is my final example here of an aquaculture example. We're seeing a lot of this activity right now of AI being applied to aquaculture software. So just measurement and data within the operation, looking at the feed input ratios, waste management, being able to take in research, try new things, and then see how the farm operation is performing with some of those changes to optimize. Really, aquaculture behaves like traditional farming. You want to have a very efficient operation. So there's a lot of new applications, coming out every day with use of technology and AI in the ecosystem. We are fascinated by it and paying a lot of attention to it as an organization. We're excited to also kind of, continue to deepen our relationship with UBC. Oceanwise has gone through a lot of changes over the last few years. So we're very interested in internships, research partnerships, commercialization opportunities. We're in each other's backyards. And I just encourage you to think more broadly about the solutions and the things that you're working on here in the future. We need scientists, of course, but we also need economists. We need product managers, coders, designers, entrepreneurs, marketers entering this space. It's a very new time for the ocean in this new climate era. Conservation is not going to scale without systems thinking and technology. It's really important that we still have our nature-based solutions and that they're technology supported, and that NGOs and the private sector continue to work really well together to solve the climate crisis. So thank you very much for your time, guys. I really appreciate it.
We have some minutes for questions, and yes, so you, Adam.
Can I not put myself on this big screen?
Yeah. You take
You
charge.
minimize, just keep it on your slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stick with the whale.
So you take charge of the Q&A, and she will help us with those.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any questions off the bat?
Yes.
Has there been good feedback from shipping companies in terms of using this like whale response, like software you're talking about?
Yeah, and it's kind of like herding goats. As soon as one or two big operators implement the technology, then the rest of them want to follow because they don't want to be seen as less responsible. So a lot of these operators are really interested in solving kind of the one-to-one need of not hitting a whale. Like Disney is really interested, like we don't want to hit whales in our own operation. It's great that we can provide data so that other ships don't hit them, but we're actually just very focused on our own needs right now. So the kind of amplified conservation and impact from giving their data to the network is kind of somewhat secondary. So we're realizing that's a bit of a theme, that they're kind of selfish in wanting to implement these systems to solve their immediate need. The impact of the network seems to be somewhat secondary.
If there's like a whale in the area, is it a diversion or are they slowing down?
Both, yeah, they'll change course, slow down, and just not hit them. The detection systems can see, depending on the conditions, about 5 kilometers out, so they have lots of time to change course. And then once the detection system detects that it's a whale and identifies that it's a whale, it sends it to a human to verify within 2 minutes for an extra layer of verification. And these are usually marine biologists or trained scientists that can identify it through the imagery. Yeah, like Mechanical Turk, they just get the notification and sit there, thumbs up, it's a whale, don't hit it, and then they get the notification. Yeah.
Follow up to that, like, does it tell you like what kind, like, does it give you different response to it?
Yeah, the system can detect what kind of whale it is. So we chose to work with Whale Spotter because they have peer-reviewed research and they've got 10 years of data trained on their AI model. So it can identify the species.
But then, I'm sorry, like in the app, like, does it tell?
No, I think that it does in the consumer-facing app, but the bridge on BC Ferries isn't like geeking out over if it's an orca, you know, and they just don't want to hit a whale.
I guess my point of that is like, if it's a pod of 20 killer whales, that's different than one humpback, like that might be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, the more data that we get into the system, the more sophisticated the AI model becomes, notifications improve. So we really just need these operators to continue to want to implement the systems. Interestingly, we also have a data partnership with the AIS that we're working on so that all that data flows into the existing navigation system. But that also creates a disincentive because other operators are like, well, we'll just wait until the data is in the AIS and we don't have to build in these systems and pay for them. So chicken and an egg problem that we're trying to be really careful of. We're not really telling too many operators about the AIS thing. It's a multi-year project, but obviously I want it to be as open source as possible. The end goal here is to avoid hitting whales. Okay, 3, yeah.
Do you do any work with freshwater fisheries?
We do, Sam.
Oh, yeah, I don't know if I need to speak in the microphone, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we're ocean wise, but that's slightly misleading. We do recommendations for any sort of aquatic species, excluding marine mammals. But that could be fisheries, aquaculture, freshwater, marine, you name it, we do it all.
Is that just coastal or do you work in like the Great Lakes?
Yep, Great Lakes. We've had some recent interest from the Manitoba Lakes Fisheries, which is a new area for me at least, potentially for working, but yeah, all lake systems that you can think of, anything, anywhere there's a fishery or aquaculture facility. Yeah.
How do you see tariffs affecting some of the seafood marketing plans? I mean, I think a lot of what you showed us was sort of pre-Donald Trump. And it seems to have a big effect over funding for conservation initiatives. It's going to affect global markets, the distribution of seafood. It's going to affect some of the climate change initiatives. I'm just wondering how you factor this into some of your thinking, or you have to rethink things that you just assumed was going to proceed in a linear direction.
Excellent question. And we're fresh off coming back from Boston at SENA, the North American Fisheries and Seafood Expo, where all the industry stakeholders are there, NGOs, and this is a hot topic. I mean, the initial answer is that it's kind of too early to tell. It's early days. We're just months into the administration and it's a lot of chaos. So long-term planning and trying to be overly strategic in a state of change is a lot of wasted energy. So a lot of businesses are focusing on internal operations and stability and not thinking about growth and long-term planning. That's on the industry side until things settle down and we know what the new operational reality will look like. So there's definitely stakeholders on the industry side that are looking at trying to grow the domestic market, looking at new international markets and avoiding the US altogether. I mean, they are our biggest purchaser of seafood, so that's a big and fast shift to make. But the government here seems to be all hands on deck right now in our current government in supporting that. And for NGOs, you know, USAID that has created a ripple effect, and what it's going to do, what it's already doing, is those same foundations and philanthropies are going to be squeezed for a lot more funding support from a larger amount of entities. So the NGOs or these private sector kind of ocean innovators need to show, I think, deeper collaboration so that they can demonstrate that they're extending resources and working closer together. I think NGOs in particular, just because funding's been so attached to their one-to-one relationships with market partners, yes, they collaborate, but they're still somewhat closed. And you know, they collaborate on certain things and then keep cards close to the chest in other ways. So the silver lining of what's happening right now is it's forcing new ways of doing things, new collaboration. It's forcing you know, the thinking around how to extend funding a lot further, to not be so and with this expectation that funding will keep on coming, you know, to be a lot more mindful of how the dollars are being spent. So we're staying nimble and adapting, and you know, given what's happening with the Trump administration, it's one market, and yes, they have a huge international impact, but there's still a lot of good actors in industry that want to do the right thing. So even though the government might be rolling back some of their commitments and making some changes to DEI and ESG commitments, businesses still have the opportunity to move things forward despite that. So we're choosing to put our energy, and we're encouraging other organizations to work with the good actors, work where people want to engage and do the right thing, instead of burning all of our energy and resources trying to get the bad actors to change in a time where they're being rewarded for bad behavior.
And I can add one thing to that is actually the fishery that we're working with in New Brunswick, they have one single buyer in the US. And they are very concerned about what that means for them. And actually the end goal of this project was to help diversify their market if they wanted to, but that's being expedited very quickly. And we've actually connected them with both of the examples that I showed on the screen of smaller fisheries kind of market spaces, to start those connections sooner rather than later, because they're really concerned and are starting to look for other markets ASAP. So yeah, it's happening.
How are we?
How are you doing, Rashid? One more?
Yeah,
Okay.
so maybe we can take one or two more. Yeah, please
Okay,
go ahead.
thank you. I would like to make a question about the eco labels, because you know, when you like, I'm a big fan of eco labels. I know at MSC and Oceanwise, I trust you.
Thank you.
The point is, I don't trust like all the others that are out there, right? Because that's the problem, I think. Like when you go to the supermarket and you see dozens of different eco labels, and okay, as a marine scientist, I understand the criteria and how I can you know, look into the criteria, understand the ways to do that. But from the general public, maybe difficult sometimes. So what I was wondering if there's something to some ways to standardize the criteria for, you know, inform people better, or is there any initiative to do this?
Yeah, I can say that. So yeah, great question. And that's some of the feedback that we hear too, right? The space is really crowded. Like, what do they all mean? Even there's confusion of like what Oceanwise means. We're very environmental focused, not like some of the other labor metrics and kind of carbon considerations. So I hear you loud and clear for sure. In terms of standardization, there is a global body. It's called the GSSI, the Global Seafood Sustainability Initiative, and they do sort of third-party accrediting for eco labels or any sort of other claim. So basically they're kind of the greenwashing police in a lot of cases. And the standard that we use is the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch standard, which is GSSI certified. So by proxy, we have that kind of claim. But not everyone does. So I would say that's kind of a central place that people could go and look for that information of like identifying what other eco labels have been third party. I don't know what that level of hierarchy is, accredited, but that's one way to start. And then, yeah, it's a good question. How do you make sure that people know what your eco label stands for? I think some of the greenwashing policies that are coming up in Europe and probably here very soon will help to kind of sort out what that means in the market for sure.
I'll just add one more thing to that.
Yeah,
With eco labels, we've got to think about two things here. There's the org to business side of the eco label, which informs the corporate retailer policy. And there's also how that label shows up on pack and then how that reflects the responsible seafood commitments to a consumer. And they're two different things. There's also generally high level of recognition of eco labels in seafood, but very little comprehension. Like, how many of you know what actual MSC certification means? Like, you see the little blue fish, white fish thing check mark, like, oh, it's responsible. But there's not actually comprehension of what's like gone into that on the background. Some other things like fair trade, obviously organics, you know, B Corp certified, 1% for the planet. Some of these have more comprehension of what those certifications or eco labels mean. And we're trying to move away from the corporate B2B relationship, relying on eco labels to inform their seafood policy. If we can give them better data and a platform that addresses all of these issues, and it doesn't exclude a small scale indigenous fisher, and it can give them the data they need to know it's a responsible source, but it's not MSC certified, then that's a win. So I think we actually need to move away from eco labels on the org to business side, but keep them for consumers and get better at storytelling what the eco label actually means. At OceanWise, we should be able to, on a can of salmon, connect that, you know, recommended label to why kelp forests are important, or why orca conservation has an impact on salmon populations, and get better at storytelling and brand experience around it.